Class war. Now, when you normally hear those two words, you generally think of an attack line from the Tory press, from a right-wing politician, or even some self-described liberals, attacked at trade unions or the left, or frankly just a politician calling for the mildest tinkering around the edges of our farcically broken economic system. Basically, the idea that, I don't know, the rich should contribute a bit more. That maybe, just maybe, when public services are falling apart, the NHS being in a state of collapse, the public realm just generally a pile of smoking rubble, living standards plummeting, well, maybe, just maybe, those who are doing pretty well could maybe just afford to pay some more money. Given, the state of the country. That's class war. That's envy, they say. It's jealousy. But as the billionaire Warren Buffett once put it, with commendable honesty, I have to say, there's class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we're winning. And he was spot on. Now, today, the pay figures for the top bosses in Britain, the top blue chip companies, came in. A 16% increase. 16%. Now, here I am on Good Morning Britain this morning. I'll be on, if you're watching this, before Wednesday, the 23rd of August. I'll be on again at 6:30am. But if you're wondering why I look so knackered, it's because these are 5am starts and I'm not an early bird.
Figures out yesterday showing that bosses effectively averaged 16% pay rises last year. When we know that in the public sector, doctors have been offered, 6%, ASLEF train drivers offered 5%, all the public sector well into single figures, not anywhere near double figures, yet bosses getting 16%. I thought we were all in this fight against inflation together.
Well, look, nurses are £5,000 on average in real terms poorer than they were in 2010. The paramedics are £6,500 poorer than they were back in 2010. Workers overall, private, public, have gone through the longest squeeze in wages now since the Napoleonic age. In fact, it's estimated in 2026 the average British worker will be no better off than they were back in 2008. And at the same time, bosses are paying themselves massive, massive wages.
An average £500,000 per head.
Well, and you know what? This comes back to the issue of inflation. Who is causing inflation in this country? Because if you look at the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, they bring together all the rich industrialised countries, the research points to the fact that a lot of companies are using this to fuel massive profits that are driving inflation. It's not wages, because we've gone through such a squeeze in wages now. The idea that ordinary people paying too much money in shops is driving inflation just is incredible. But we've got to look at the top. We've got to look at behaviour.
We look at the top, and what do we then do? Because, of course, people can rail about the unfairness, they can be bitter. But apart from saying, please share that around,
tax them.
You practice?
Tax them properly.
Andrew, what's the details line on it?
Listen, I'm not going to advocate wage controls, because that's the root of madness. But it's ridiculous. While they're telling people further down the food chain, you will take 4 or 5% when inflation is still nearly 7%. It ain't right.
OK.
Now, would you look at that? I even have Andrew Pearce of the Daily Mail, GB News, whose Twitter handle is quite literally Tory Boy Pearce, agreeing with me. That is how indefensibly bad our economic system has become. Maybe the revolution really is on its way, after all. Now, according to the High Pay Centre, according to their new report, the FTSE 100, that's the top 100 companies on the stock market, their chief executive pay increased from 3.38 million in 2021 to 3.91 million in 2022. Median CEO income is now 118 times the median UK full-time worker. To be clear, the median means 50% earn more, 50% earn less. So 118 times more of the median UK full-time worker compared to 108 times in 2021 and 79 times in 2020. Can you look at that? That's how much you've got an exploding gap between bosses and workers. Now, it's really important to emphasise this point because this country is up shit creek. I'm sorry you haven't noticed, but it really is in quite an extraordinary mess. But look at what this economic system does. Because every time we have a crisis, like the 2008 financial crisis, like the current general nightmare that we're trapped in, it's working people and those who struggle who get hammered, while those at the top just boom more and more. Now, we saw that in the first few years after the crash, when the wealth of the top 1,000 millionaires and billionaires, the top 1,000 richest people, doubled, even though after the financial crash with austerity, there was an unprecedented has become even more unprecedented, squeezing living standards, where you got, for example, an onslaught on the welfare state, where the government, the Conservative government, bankrolled by many of the same bankers who plunged Britain into economic disaster, decided to empty the pockets of disabled people and the low paid. Now, it's crucial, it really isn't crucial to emphasise that the wealth of those at the top it's simply generated, this idea, they're just sitting around just because of their huge talents and extraordinary ability and all the rest of it. I mean, even if you factor out those who've got inheritance or those who are just lucky, right place, right time, that kind of thing, the wealth of those at the top is generated by the hard graft of so many other people. Not just the workers who directly work for those businesses, the real wealth creators, I'd put it to you, but the teachers who train up their workforce, the healthcare workers who, stop illness collapsing society. Not very profitable, I have to say, society if everyone's just dying of avoidable illnesses and suffering terrible health so they can't go to work, And those are the same healthcare workers and teachers who've suffered extraordinary real terms pay cuts. Now, that's without even talking about the infrastructure that those at the top benefit from, the business owners, courtesy of the state, law and order protecting their property. So they live off the largesse of the state. They exploit the labour of their workforce. They often don't pay taxes, or very little of what they should, while workers get battered by falling wages and collapsing public services. That is how crisis works in this country. It's not crisis for those at the top. They look after themselves and often just make sure they get richer and richer. Crisis is something that happens to ordinary people. Now, as for the inflationary crisis, as the professor of economics, Jonathan Portes, points out, he says, as I've been pointing out for some time, high nominal pay growth for the already well-off, high inflation for the poor. Inflation, the crisis we're in, does not hit people in the same way. If you are struggling, if you're poor, then prices are higher. It is expensive to be poor in this country. Life becomes more expensive, not just because of inflation, but everything, for example, like being driven into debt, the interest rates that you suffer from being in debt, which are now going up, that kind of thing. That's the poor who suffer while those at the top boom like never before. Now, what does it take? What does it take to get angry about this, guys? What are you waiting for? What does it take to go, why on earth am I tolerating such a ludicrously unhinged economic system where wealth is relentlessly sucked up at the top, when crisis happens, sacrifice is demanded from those least able to afford it, while it remains a never-ending party at the top. Something's got to give. But the Tories will defend this economic system to their grave. That's why they exist as a political force. But Labour isn't offering anything other than tweaks around the edges. Now, we've had this crisis, and we talk about inflation and how working people must have pay restraint, when it wasn't their falling wages which caused this mess. But, as I said in the clip, corporate profits booming, and then with those booming profits at corporations, they pay their CEOs huge pay increases compared to the rest of the population. That's why we're in a mess. And do we keep ending up in a situation where we have these crises, caused often by those at the top, millions of people who had nothing to do with the crisis are expected to pick up the bill, and we just lurch to the next crisis where the same thing happens all over again? I think a storm's coming myself. I don't think that's tenable. Something's got to give. I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. Be interested to hear your thoughts. Do like and subscribe. Do support us on patreon.com/OJOS84 to keep the video channel and podcast and all the stuff that we do on the road. We're not bankrolled by FTSE 100 companies. And listen to us on the podcast. I'll see you in a bit.